Hi, I'm Carla co-owner of On the Bluff Labradors, and this is going to be about vaccinations. So the first thing I'm going to say that if it's possible, if you can find a homeopath, naturopathic vet in your area, that's a good way to go, especially if you're going with us and you're going to be doing these alternative things. They'll be much more open to the raw diet. They'll be open to titering. We'll talk about that later. So it's really in your interest to go there so that you don't, you're not going to be read the riot act every time you're trying to get something done where they're going to tell you have to do it this way or that way. And you're the only one who can advocate for your dog, just like with your kids if you have any. So just consider that. You could Google in your area somebody who does acupuncture, acupressure, because they're more likely to be on the more alternative. They will be more alternative, more open to more alternative ways of doing things. And I will say that homeopathy, for instance, really works well for dogs. So usually when you're particularly going to go to a mainstream vet, but a lot of the alternative ones, they're going to give the first shot that they're going to want to give is something called it's called the DA2 LPP. So I'm going to say don't do this shot. The first thing I'm going to say for all vaccinations, do one at a time and try to spread them out over months at a time. The D in this DA2 LPP is distemper, and distemper has basically disappeared from the universe. All diseases have cycles. We don't get bubonic plague anymore, and they cycle out. So there are still pockets of it here and there, and you can ask your vet how much distemper have you seen in the area. You can even Google it as well. I do find that the risk of getting distemper versus the risk of the vaccination is much lower, because I've had 2 bad phone calls, and one puppy died from the vaccination, the other one went into a neurological meltdown, which that puppy was saved, but I just feel it's not a necessary vaccination. So that's up to you, but if you do it by itself. The next one is the A2. The A2 is also called Bordetella, and that's a kennel cough, and I highly recommend you don't get this at all, ever. It's really not necessary. The kennel cough is bacterial. It's not life-threatening. They get a cough. You can, if you want, you can give them antibiotics or just let them cough it through. It's very contagious, which is why it's called a kennel cough, because you go to a kennel and all the dogs are going to get it. You will, if you do kennel your dog, and we recommend that you don't, but if you do kennel your dog, they're going to insist that you get it, and that's really more for insurance reasons. And then your dog will come out and often have the cough anyway, because there's 2 strains, that's what the 2 stands for, and there are hundreds of strains. So it's kind of like the flu shot. It has that thing to it, and I just recommend that you forget about it. And the next one is leptospirosis. This you might consider getting, particularly if you live in the city, because this is carried in the rat urine, and rats pee into stagnant water. Your dog drinks the water, that's how they get it. And it's a little bit on the rise these days. You might see if it's in your area. Most of us don't think we live around rats, but we do. But particularly, you definitely do in the city. I don't think I've ever gone to the city without seeing a rat. So they're there. At any rate, so you might consider that. It used to be a terrible vaccination. It's now a whole lot better, because they have improved it. So I now feel a little more comfortable about saying that you should get it. The next one, the next P is some kind of flu that's not even on the side of the country yet. I say forget that one. And then there's Parvo. Now we ourselves here do 2 Parvo shots, because that is an epidemic, and it'll kill your puppy, and it's just a terrible, terrible disease. It is actually a puppy problem. It is not a big dog problem. So really Parvo is not something you should do when your dogs are grown. You no longer need to do Parvo. First of all, it doesn't really affect them. They can carry it. But most likely the puppy vaccination has fully vaccinated them. We do too. We like to, because the first one puts them at about 40%. The second one will fully immunize them. So now we can talk a little bit about titers. So basically, instead of giving your dog another shot, so let's say you decide you're going to do the leptospirosis, and then you're going to come back a few months later. What we suggest you do is titer. Titering is just measuring the immunity of whatever you're measuring. Like if you've ever been titered for Lyme, they're taking your blood and they're checking to see if you've formed antibodies to the Lyme, and that's the way it is for all of them. So you can actually titer for the lepto, see if it took, because most likely it did, particularly if you give your puppy a vaccination from 16 weeks on, because at 16 weeks their full immune system is pretty much in gear. So if you wait to that time and then give them that immunization, then you can titer them for the next one. If they're fully immune, you don't have to give them another one. And it's a way of avoiding these multiple vaccinations, which really dogs don't need. There was a recent study out where they studied dogs for 10 years, and they lasted for 10 years. The vaccination was good for 10 years. They were fully immune the whole time. So this is pretty much just a little bit of a money trail, and it's just also more on a human idea, because humans do need to build up their immune systems in a certain way that dogs don't. So I highly recommend that you titer. So do your vaccination, and then the next time titer. And I do recommend after a dog is 3 or 4 years old, stop. The only one that you have to do by law is rabies, unfortunately, because really you can do one rabies shot and they'd be good for life. But the law is, you do one, and then the next year you have to do another, and then you have to do it every 3 years. If you don't have to license your dog, or you can avoid licensing your dog, you don't really need to, I highly recommend that you don't keep doing these rabies shots. And after a dog, as I say, is 4 or 5, stop doing any vaccination whatsoever. They don't need it anymore, and you're compromising their immune system, and eventually it's going to, I believe, shorten their lifespan, possibly make them sicker. And you certainly don't want to be vaccinating an 11-year-old dog or a 12-year-old dog. So that's pretty much the vaccinations that we do or don't do in this case. We do Parvo because we really have to protect ourselves, especially when people are coming in and visiting and so on. But we actually don't do anything else except the rabies that by law we have to do, but we don't do any other kind of shot. And I think this will help keep your dog